So with that, I'll step aside and introduce Portland Police Deputy Chief Chris Davis.
Hopefully you can hear me. Thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon. And today we are announcing the formation of an enhanced community safety team, which you may hear referred to by its initials ECST. And this is at the direction of Mayor Wheeler, and we're implementing this plan right away to address gun violence in our city. And this team will fall under the investigations branch of the Police Bureau. It'll be composed of 3 police sergeants, 12 officers, and 6 detectives who will focus full-time on investigations involving gun violence in our community. The people assigned to this will primarily be the ones who are assigned to the existing, we call it the assault detail within the detective division, which does follow-up investigations on major persons crimes. And so many of these people are experienced investigators, and they're people who've been doing this work for a long time, for in some cases, many years. The assault detail has been doing follow-up investigations from shooting cases for the last several months, and they have been making progress on some cases. They've made arrests, they've forwarded cases to the district attorney's office. In fact, just yesterday, there was an announcement from the district attorney's office that about 26 different gun violence related cases they've initiated just this month. This newly kind of reoriented team will also work collaboratively with our other public safety partners, including the district attorney's office, the United States Attorney's Office, Multnomah County Department of Community Justice, the Portland Office of Violence Prevention, and then federal partners like the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and investigative units from neighboring police agencies as well. We hope to, in the work of this team, to narrow our focus in these investigations to what we think is really a small group of repeat shooters who are responsible for an oversized proportion of gunfire incidents in the city. This is not to say that they're responsible for all of them, because gun violence is a more complex issue than that. But we do know from experience that often there's a small number of people who are involved in lots and lots of these incidents. And so working on tying all those cases together and holding some of those repeat offenders accountable will make a bigger impact on the problem. The goal is to take, frankly, these people who are repeat trigger pullers off the street, and in turn to reduce this really disturbing trend of gun violence in our neighborhoods. One important component of this team will be that we're adding some on-call capability. So we'll have an on-call team of investigators who are dedicated to respond 24/7 to shooting incidents citywide. And these will be, a little bit higher profile shooting incidents, not necessarily every time a firearm is discharged in the city, but we have seen a number of cases where there are, for example, a large number of rounds fired at one of these incidents, or certainly the cases where someone is injured by gunfire. And the idea is that this team can work directly with patrol resources to do immediate investigations and maybe start following up on leads that are gained right there at the scene a little more quickly than we would if patrol just processed the scene for evidence and then referred the case later on. So they can run with leads faster and in real time and maybe get to case resolutions more quickly. And it will make a more consistent approach to scene processing, because obviously forensic evidence is a really critical piece of these investigations, and making sure that our crime scenes are really precisely documented and evidence is collected and analyzed properly is a very big part of making these cases. What on-call means is simply that these folks are available after hours. They might be home, they might be in bed asleep, and we'll summon them to come to the scene of these events as necessary. It'll be the sergeants of the unit who will make the decision about what will prompt a call out in these cases. And you know, as I said, this gives us some really good benefits in terms of a little more investigative capability right there at the scene. This team will also, because it'll be the same people a lot of the time investigating more of these cases, they'll be able to connect cases together, because again, we know that sometimes one person or a small group of people might be responsible for a whole bunch of these incidents. We know that some of our neighborhoods have been disproportionately impacted by gun violence, and these investigative measures that we're putting together are intended to be a step towards addressing this problem. Another benefit is that this will free up patrol officers. We had been having patrol officers process these calls, and it's a really time-consuming task for them. And so this will help us to free up those patrol resources more quickly to be able to go out and take other calls and address call response times and provide timely service for other emergencies in the city. There are some additional costs involved in this program, and we're working with the mayor's office and with city council on the funding, but we didn't want to wait because of the urgent need. We wanted to start doing this work and begin this approach now. But we are, you know, obviously we'll work collaboratively with council offices on the funding. It's not a huge amount of money. It is a little more than we have in our budget right now, but we didn't want the money to stand in the way while people are being hurt and impacted in the way that they are in our community. This is a very high priority for us in the Police Bureau and as a public safety system. You know, this is not just a police issue. This is a public health issue, really, and the police have one very important part of this issue, but you know, this is a bigger community-wide public health issue, and hence the engagement that we've done with other system partners, including some non-public safety partners and members of our community, in coming up with this approach. So we think that this is a step in the right direction to address this, again, really historic increase in gun violence that we've seen in the city. Will this fix all of the problem? No, it won't. Like I said, this is a much bigger problem than just investigating gun crimes. And while that is a very important part and has to happen, and shoring up that investigative ability is a critical piece of our larger overall strategy for dealing with this problem. There's still a lot more important work to do, and we're working with both our community partners and our other local government and system partners to come up with the right approach to this issue that solves the problem without creating a whole lot of other problems in the process. And frankly, we still very much, for any of this to be successful, we need that community partnership. And I want to thank the large number of people out in our community who have joined with us in a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations and a lot of intense discussion to come around this problem and try and find a way for us to make things better out there in our community. And so I would, while I thank them, I would also ask them to keep doing what they're doing and to join with us to continue to take a stand against this violence that is completely unacceptable that's going on in our neighborhoods. So with that, I am happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, I see some questions have come in. I know Wright Gezaway said he had a question, so I'll start with you, Wright. Go ahead.
Chief, why was this something that could not have been implemented right when the city disbanded GVRT instead of 8 months later after hundreds of shootings and a high number of people who've been killed?
Oh, I see the problem. Chief, let me see if I have to ask you to unmute. There you go. Okay, try it now.
That's better. I promise I really was trying to answer your question and not stonewall you. But no, in all seriousness, that's a fair question. And I think, you know, at the time that GVRT was taken out of the picture, that came along with a lot of other resource reductions and just a real period of crisis in the city. And, you know, in hindsight, had we been able to maintain that capability, I would like to have been able to, but we were in such resource constraint at that time. You know, when we took a very large budget cut, obviously, in this year's budget. And our challenge was to try to meet the needs of that budget reduction without laying people off, without losing some of the really dedicated and really highly qualified public safety professionals that we have. And so our priority at that time was to keep people here as much as we could. And unfortunately, you know, with that on-call status comes a cost. We have to pay people extra for being on call because they're subject to come to work and there are things they can't do. They have to stay close to the city and they, you know, and so we have to compensate them for that. And so we had to make some decisions about cutting the number of on-call positions. And we tried back when we lost GVRT to come up with a plan for patrol officers to go process these scenes and kind of do the start of the investigations. And, you know, while our patrol officers are very highly qualified and they're very good at their jobs, this is just a way for us to have a little more consistency in getting that work done. And you know, the approach we tried was not ideal. And we've been able to scrape together some resources and come up with an approach that we think will meet our needs better.
Thank you.
Alex Zielinski, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I have, I guess, two questions, which I know is annoying, but they're both very short. The first one, I'm just curious if there's a price tag or there's a number of additional budget dollars that will need to be tacked on to the proposed fiscal year budget, what that looks like. And then second, just curious if kind of what work you and PPB and other officials have done to be intentional about this new program, not bringing with it any of the concerns that some of the members of the public had with GET and then GVRT.
Sure. So the cost we estimate will be around $150,000 to $160,000 for the rest of this fiscal year, which ends at the end of June. And then going forward, the cost of something like this is in the $350,000 a year range. And again, it just depends on how many people are on call at any given time. And, you know, if you're on vacation and you're not on call, then we don't have to pay the on-call pay. And so, you know, it's not like I can give you a precise dollar figure, but it's in the neighborhood of $350,000 a year. Plus there are some overtime costs, but we're working on some plans that will help maybe bring in some outside resources for more of those. And the second part of your question, yeah, the issues that we heard about when we lost GVRT have been in the middle of the whole conversation since we started having the escalation in gun violence, because you know, the sort of, and it has to do with the sort of traditional police approach when there are problems like this, which is normally for us as police to come to define the problem and then to impose a solution on the problem. And in the past, we haven't always done a good job of engaging the community in that solution. And that's how I think you get that kind of collateral damage in terms of disparities and the other public concerns that we heard in the past. And so we want to be very intentional, and we have been very intentional all along at engaging the community so that, and this is just one part of what will probably be a much larger effort as we're able to come up with those strategies that we want to employ. But the difference this time is that there is community engagement in determining what those strategies will be and some perspective. And there's more work to do, and there are more stakeholders that we need to bring to the table to make sure that whatever we do is calibrated in a way that the community can get behind it, and that it addresses all of those concerns, and that has community input into what solution we will use. And then, you know, the community support that comes with that buy-in. And we've done things like this on a smaller scale in the past. We've done community policing projects for years where we convene a group of stakeholders in a neighborhood, sit down, come up with a definition of the problem together, and then come up with a solution that everybody is comfortable with, not just police, but also community members. And that approach works really well. That's what we're trying to apply in this case.
Okay, I know we have several more questions and we're running out of time, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. Maggie Vespa, you're next up. Go ahead. Okay, looks like looks like somebody's having mic issues. If it's okay, Maggie, I'll go on to Sarah Hurwitz right now, and then come right back to you next. Okay, so Sarah, when you're ready, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, technical difficulties. Okay. So last year when the GVRT was dissolved, I spoke with the chief briefly, and this isn't similar to what Alex's question was. So in the same vein, the chief said that this kind of work was difficult to do without the GVRT because he said they had relationships with the community. So will this team be focused, you know, on any kind of outreach, or will it strictly be investigatory?
So this effort that we're talking about today is really much more investigation focused. In the course of doing those investigations, a lot of times you can't help but develop some of those relationships with people that you talk to a lot in the course of investigating these crimes. But it's not the same thing as the old GVRT model, where we had a group of officers in uniform out engaged in proactive patrol type activity, a big part of which was making those relationships with people involved in the problem.
Okay, and Chief, I'm going to read out of the chat. Maggie Vespa's question was, when did the mayor give his direction to form the unit?
I'm trying to remember exactly what day that was, but it's been within the last week. And it's not a matter, it's not like a light switch. We've been talking about this for a while. It's just with something like this, there's some groundwork for us to lay before, you know, the mayor's going to be able to say, okay, go ahead with that approach. And so we've been working on that groundwork collaboratively with the mayor's office and our other partners for a while.
Okay, moving on to Tess Risky. Go ahead, Tess.
Hi, so it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like what you're saying is that this new group will involve potentially less of the community relationship building than the GVRT. Is that correct?
Not really, no, because all police work involves community relationships. And you know, when you are in an investigative assignment like this, that looks different than it does when you're out in a uniform patrol assignment. But no, I wouldn't say that's accurate, because police work is community relationships.
Okay, we're just trying to get in a few more questions before the end. Nick Budnick, you have your question ready?
Hey, thanks very much. Chief, hoping you can help me understand the difference between this and GVRT in terms of the cooperation with federal agencies. How will this be different?
So the cooperation with federal agencies is really focused on the investigative part of this. And you know, a way to think about all of this approach is, obviously there is an investigative piece that has to happen when there is a shooting incident. And that's what we're focusing on with this part. The old GVRT model was more of a proactive uniform patrol group that went out into the community, tried to interdict guns, take guns off the street, and had a lot of interaction with people proactively as opposed to reactively in an investigation. And so the federal resources are really good for local agencies on the investigative side of things, just because of the tremendous investigative resources that organizations like the FBI have. So the federal partnership on the investigative side of our gun violence approach is really an opportunity for us to take advantage of some of those resources that we just don't possess in local law enforcement.
Okay, and Chief, I know you've got another meeting coming up here, so let me know if we need to bail out. But I
think I could probably take one or maybe two more quick questions because I know people have a lot of questions they want.
Yeah, for sure. David Ashton, go ahead with your question. You're up.
Hi there, folks. I do East Portland news, and specifically the neighbors have been asking me, how does this plan specifically address the shooting violence in East Portland, namely outer East Portland, where about half of these shootings are taking place?
Sure, thanks, David. And you're absolutely right. We do know that there are some neighborhoods in our city that are disproportionately impacted by this problem. And a lot of those neighborhoods are in East Portland. And so this will be, again, just an effort to start to make cases on some of those folks that we know are involved in lots of different events, and then they won't be involved in them anymore. And so that's one way of reducing the problem. We hope that the benefit of this effort will be felt most strongly in those neighborhoods that are disproportionately impacted by the problem.
Okay, and then we'll do one more question, and then the rest of you we'll try to answer your questions via email or phone. So Liz Birch, you get the last question. Go ahead.
Yeah, how much funding do you currently have, and where's that coming from? I'm also wondering, when I talked to the DA's office about 2 weeks ago, they said the majority of these shootings seem to be gang related. I'm curious if that's been your experience and what you're attributing this rise in shootings to.
So funding is a big question because, overall our police bureau budget is in the neighborhood of about $224 million a year. Most of that is in personnel costs. And so when we take big budget cuts, that requires us to reduce the number of people and move people around to compensate for that loss of personnel. The budget is an enormous thing for us. That's longer than a 2-minute answer, unfortunately. But for this particular program, I would have to look and see what exactly the budget is in investigations. But the way we budget, it's not all the way down with specificity to gun violence investigations versus other things. We just knew that in order to have this capability for on-call service, we would need more funding to cover those costs. And so the numbers that I quoted you are related to those. And I'm sorry, what was the second half of your question? Was
yeah, so the second half of my question, I was asking what percentage you think of these shootings is gang related, and what you attribute that rise to.
It's hard, and I can't give you a specific percentage. I know that there is some group related component to shootings, but like I said in my opening remarks, gun violence is a really big, complicated thing, and it can't all be attributed to one cause. We have a small number of shooting incidents that are domestic violence, although we haven't really seen domestic violence shooting incidents go up. But we do know that a lot of our gun violence in the city is related to groups of people who are at odds with other groups of people, however you want to refer to that. Percentage wise, anything that I gave you would be it would be challenging because there are so many facets to it. You know, does an act of gun violence committed by somebody who's associated with a group maybe that we know about that is involved in this activity, but has nothing to do with that group. It's, you know, a road rage incident or something like that. How do you count that? And so I always want to caution people. There's this temptation to want to say that it's all gang violence or it's all domestic violence. I wish it were that simple, but it just isn't. These are really complex human dynamics that are at play here. And so I caution against, you know, we do know that group related violence is a sizable part of the problem, but it's a little more complicated than just that.
Okay, Chief, I know you've got a hard stop, so how about we do this? I'll let you step away, and then if anybody else still has questions, I'll leave this call open and I'll try to address what I can. And then if I need to gather info and get back to you, I can do that over email. So Deputy Chief Davis, thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
And I'm typing in the chat right now a question from Maggie about how soon the team is hitting the streets. It actually was officially active as of yesterday. Actually, let me. I think they actually went out on the call. Actually, I know they went out on the call yesterday. We put out a press release on North Alaska. So they are active as right now. Again, the primary reason is we didn't want to wait. Once we had the plan and approval from the mayor that we're going to get funding worked out, the plan was to get it started right away. Again, those of you that didn't get your questions in, I do apologize. Maxine, I'm going to ask you to unmute, and if you have a question beyond your other question, go ahead.
Well, you answered my question on the number of on-call. I just wonder how many assault detectives that leaves that are focused on non-gun violence, and what type of community outreach was done and will continue on the workings of this team.
Yeah, I will have to go and check how many resources are remaining with the assault detail. They will continue to address the same types of Measure 11 related high, serious assaults that aren't related to gun crimes. So these two teams work really closely in collaboration. And so, they've been doing this as a larger team for the last few months. And so there will be still some of that coordination, but now we have one team focused on the shooting aspect of gun violence, and we have another team focused on kind of everything else related to assaults. And then the other question, about community outreach. Those conversations continue to be ongoing. The Bureau is in ongoing conversation with advisory groups and others that are asking us to do this kind of thing. And so I can see if there's anything more specific that I can provide you about this particular plan, but the urgency was there, and it was felt that it was important. Again, it's not going to be, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just focusing a team of investigators on this one issue because of its level of priority, and instead of having it be a part of the larger assault detail. So we don't want people to think that it's going to be, we're redoing something or reinventing everything. It's going to be, most of the same investigators that have been doing it will continue to do so. All right, Jonathan Levinson, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, Chief Davis said that one of the things that's making this different is that there's more community engagement and input how they're going about it. But there's always been sort of this like elements of the community that supported GVRT before, and I'm wondering, was there any effort, or did you successfully expand your engagement and input and get support from groups that previously maybe did not support GVRT? Did you bring more people into the proverbial tent?
I would say yes, but specifically I can't provide that because, again, a lot of these conversations have been ongoing as after GVRT went away, the discussions began then about what do we do now? What should we be doing now? And I know that the chief and all of the chiefs have been involved ever since then on speaking with our advisors and community groups and getting their input and advisement on what this should look like. And so that I believe that was part of the assault unit, taking on or getting more resources in order to focus on and take and investigate, do follow up on shootings. And then with this one, with this team, it, again, it's very close to what the assault detail was doing before. Just now they have extra resources for having investigators on call, and will be dedicated to doing follow up on this one specific problem that the community has. So that I see is all the questions. I'll go ahead and wrap it up here, but if any further questions do come up, I know Maxine is asking about the number of shootings so far this year. I will have to go and check. I don't want to give a incorrect number, and I don't have it in front of me. So I will get that. If you have any other questions, just send us an email, pbbpio@portlandoregon.gov. We'll seek out the answers for you over the course of today. So again, thank you everybody for being here, and have a great day.